Good evening and welcome to Constructing Knowledge, the program that changes how we know the world. I'm your host, Mark Strathy, and tonight we have as our guest the artist Gary Panter. Gary is among a handful of legends in the world of underground comics. That is, to distinguish these from comics involving superheroes. Underground comics are generally more psychological and surreal. Born in Oklahoma, Panter is known for his aggressive punk style from the late 70s and early 80s. He was an early contributor to Art Spiegelman's Raw magazine, and he has done numerous illustrations for album art such as Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention and The Screamers. He developed a continuing saga of Jimbo in the late 70s, a disaffected and confused youth who slogged his way through Dal Tokyo, a surreal and futuristic place that belies Panter's affection for Philip K. Dick. Recently, Panter has Jimbo following Virgil through Dante's Divine Comedy in a series of lavish graphic novels. Jimbo is normally perplexed by the world he inhabits, which brings to mind Alice's dilemma in Wonderland. Gary was instrumental in the design of Pee-wee's Playhouse in the 1980s. He has 3 Emmy Awards for his efforts with Pee-wee. In 1993, the New Yorker sent Panter to Waco, Texas to do some reportage illustrations and stories about the siege of the Branch Davidian cult. That year, he also did a feature for the New Yorker called Summer in the City. Gary is currently having an exhibition of his paintings from the 1980s to the present, a retrospective at Frederick's Freezer in Chelsea. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because you've always had a foot in both worlds. Like, you've always done commercial work or illustration, but you've also done work for galleries and, you know, paintings. I mean, and your show in Chelsea has a little bit of both, or is it?
Well, it's all personal work.
It's all personal work.
Right. And then that's how I define the difference. People often ask me about commercial art versus fine art.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really personal work versus commissioned work in some ways.
Uh-huh.
And I really set out to be a painter. That's what my first passion was after dinosaurs.
Right, right.
Was modern art. And so since I was a kid, I've been painting. And
you studied painting in...
right. I have a degree in painting from East Texas State University.
Uh-huh.
And but in the 60s, I got interested in comics through hippie comics. And so I became known for that.
Mm-hmm. You mean define hippie comics?
Oh, Zap Comics was a good example of Art Crumb and the guys in the late 60s, early 70s.
And but when you were in school, was that was around at that time? You know, that was in the air.
It was hippie days when I went to school. It was 1969 when I went to college, and so it was a little late to be in, you know, the main thrust of hippies, but the 60s kind of went on to about 1976 in some ways. You know.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That was the last time I saw anyone flash the peace sign, was in 76.
Because, you know, you would be the generation after Art Crumb. I mean, Art Crumb is probably 10 or 15 years.
Maybe like 8 years, but still it's made a big difference. A few years made a big difference. And,
yeah, absolutely. So was your Bible Belt background instrumental in making you who you are, or that kind of irreverent? I mean, there's nothing less Bible Belt than Zap comic books, you know, I guess.
That's true, but they probably couldn't exist without fundamentalist Christianity.
Yeah.
No, I was raised in Texas among very serious, righteous people, but people who thought everyone else was going to hell,
right?
But them.
Right.
And like a lot of religions. So it wasn't really a very Christianly Christianity. And it burned me out. I was a missionary to Belfast, Northern Ireland in 1969, and that was kind of the end. After I went to college then.
Were you in high school then? Or?
It was when I was a senior in high school, the year after I graduated, I went to Belfast.
Is that right?
Yeah. But there was a lot of art happening in Belfast, so I could kind of somehow sneak away, or people helped me sneak away, or to see museums and things, and it was great.
And then you went from Texas or Oklahoma and Texas to L.A.
Yeah, I was born in Oklahoma, but mostly I grew up in Texas. And when I graduated from art school, I couldn't really get work. I worked as a janitor in an insurance building for a year, And then I worked as a color separator for a year, or part of a year in Dallas, which was very helpful actually in the print business.
Oh, yeah.
Adjusting color and color mixing. And I couldn't really get the work I was looking for, so I had to decide between LA and New York, and I went to New York, and it seemed scary and dirty and creepy.
You just visited New York, you mean?
I visited New York.
Yeah.
And that's before the people had to pick up dog waste.
Right, right.
So it was slippery back then.
The subways were a lot different back then, too.
It was really scary, and I have stories, but they're too long. But, just, so I went to LA. It seemed like easier. In some ways, it was kind of easy in some ways.
Was it? And
it's maybe never easy to survive as an artist, but it was temperate. They had beautiful palm trees, nice people. People were slow like me.
But that was the LA punk scene was happening. So you're talking about now the 70s, right? I mean,
I moved to LA in '76, and in '77 I discovered Slash magazine, and I was looking since the early '70s for a place for my art to fit in, and it fit in graphically with punk. And so I visited the guys at Slash, and they gave me a page, and so I began to get published.
Was Slash a punk magazine? It was like punk rock. Was it a music magazine?
It was a music magazine. Slash. And
that was the first thing you ever did was like a page for them.
Yeah, I started getting commercial work because I had to live, and so I couldn't really make change or anything. I don't know numbers. I don't do numbers. But. So anyway, I do drawings.
But was it mostly music-related stuff you were doing, or like album art and stuff like that at that time?
Anything I could get. A lot of was music, because there was a lot of record companies in Los Angeles and movie companies, so I could work on movie posters and so on, and just whatever it took to pay the rent. And my work was always strange, so it never really fit into the art world easily.
Did you start publishing comics back then, or?
I started publishing, self-publishing comics, which became a phenomenon, really.
Now they call them zines, right?
Zines, mini comics, self-published comics, alt comics. But there weren't many people doing it back then. Linda Berry and Matt Groening and our friend Byron Werner and myself were probably the only people practically in LA doing that sort of thing.
Is that when Matt Groening was doing Life in Hell?
Life in Hell. And
the two bunny rabbits who were...
Yeah, I met Matt, and he was working at a copy shop, so he could make really elaborate comics at night, I guess, after the shop was closed, and he made like really fat Xerox comics with fold-outs and paper.
He wasn't doing The Simpsons then. He was doing, it was these weird bunny rabbit
before.
things.
Yeah, he was broke then.
Yeah.
But he had more money than me, because I noticed when I went to his place there was change lying on the floor.
Change on the floor?
He wore shorts, and he would lie on the floor, and the change would fall out of his shorts. Bermuda shorts.
Oh, good. This is a lot of insight.
So if we got hungry, we could walk around and look for quarters in his carpet.
Right. Did you start doing Jimbo then? Or?
I did, about the same time, in about '77, I guess, is when he was first published.
You did Jimbo in L.A., or you started doing that in L.A.? I
started drawing it in Texas in about '74 for myself, but again, it didn't fit anywhere. It didn't fit with hippie comics. Arcade magazine existed then, but I didn't send it to Arcade because it was a little stranger than hippie comics even, and so I kind of had to wait for some place that would fit.
Yeah, because it was, I mean, your style with Jimbo has really changed. I mean, lots of different Jimbos I've noticed are done in these different styles, and you have a very, were the early ones like the more simple ones, and then they got very complicated, I know, later.
They were very scratchy in the beginning. I had a line that was almost sewn like this.
Yeah,
because my rapidographs were jamming, and I was just trying to, I'm left-handed, so I just had trouble getting my tools to work. So that kind of and I liked woodcuts, so when I was having problem with my art materials, but it looked like woodcuts, then I was like, okay.
Yeah, because some of your work has that kind of bold woodcut look to it, but it's not woodcuts, though. Or?
It's not wood. Sometimes it is, but mostly it's just drawn with ink on paper, mostly.
Yeah.
And over years, I found more tools to help. Like now there's great Japanese nibs. It's like, antique.
Oh,
you
yeah,
dip it in the ink.
No, rapidographs are a constant problem, it seems
Right.
like. They're always jamming.
They have a great feel, but they're a problem.
Are you a believer in like the old crow quill pen, the steel tip crow quill pen, the kind that you dip in a bottle of ink? Or?
That's what I use now.
Yeah.
But actually, the Japanese started making them for cartooning, and the steel was better and they're pointier. So actually, my antique tools are more advanced now than when I first started drawing.
Yeah.
The steel got better.
And who is Jimbo?
Jimbo, I guess he's an alternate.
Is he you, or is it?
Ego. He's kind of a pug-nosed, red-haired, freckle-faced, all-American guy in a way.
Right.
But he goes
looks
around.
like Archie a little bit, or I don't know.
It's like Archie meets Joe Palooka meets my brother, and
Yeah.
So he's just got a
Then
big,
he wears a kilt.
big dumb guy wearing a kilt and not much else. He just walks around trying to get breakfast in a world gone mad.
Trying to get breakfast. Why the kilt? That's.
I think in Cub Scouts they once made us wear kilts, and dance around a fire.
Is that right?
Which was a light bulb with cellophane.
That sounds wrong. Somehow.
And you're like in front of everyone, but basically naked with a little strip of cloth.
Really?
There was something that stuck with me about that.
And
I'm part
like,
Native American. I'm part Choctaw Indian. So I think
so
it goes,
that's part of it too.
Right.
And are you part Scottish or?
Perhaps.
Is there
Panter, who knows? It's English. It means the pantry, the guy that keeps the pantry.
Is that right?
Yeah, the pantler. It was the pantler, and it became Panter. But the family story in my family is that we're Jewish.
Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of people move to America and become hillbillies and forget who they are. And so that's our family story, is that we were Jewish.
In the European sense, or in the,
It's the only thing. It's just one sentence. There's not any story that goes along with it. We
Is
think
that
we
right?
might be Jewish.
But so what is Dal Tokyo then?
Dal Tokyo is the place where all my cartoons take place, and it's a
All your, not just Jimbo?
no, pretty much it all takes place in Dal Tokyo.
It's
And
this alternate universe you've created for all your characters to inhabit? Or?
It came about when I was working as a janitor, actually. When I was working as a janitor, I started fantasizing about the desks being city blocks, and I invented a history for them. But it turned into an idea about a colony on Mars started by Texans and Japanese, hence Tokyo, Dallas, Tokyo.
Oh, Dallas, Tokyo.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's
I
the
never made
idea.
that connection.
That Mars has been terraformed, and
Is that right?
yeah, that was the idea. I have a book coming out called Dal Tokyo in the spring, which will detail that a little bit.
The history of the prequel for all the Jimbo
prequel.
stories, or something,
What?
or like the creation of Dal Tokyo, or
It's just about the place, but actually it's a surrealist book, I would say. It's a book that starts off with a story you could comprehend, and then the further you get into it, the more difficult and unfriendly it is. And then it gets friendly again right at the last minute.
yeah, because you're not big on real linear narratives. I mean, your narratives are generally kind of surreal narratives that happen here. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
sometimes some are more than others. There's a book, Coal of Madness, that has a straight narrative. And the cartoons I'm drawing these days have straight narratives, because I've done all kinds of experimental work.
right, because
so-
you have. Do you want to talk about your the Jimbo in Purgatory? Because you're doing Dante's Divine Comedy with Jimbo as Dante, and then Virgil is a machine that he rides.
He's a parole robot, actually. Jimbo got in a little trouble.
Right.
So
So he rides this kind of robot around through the circles of hell.
Everyone will have those eventually, not in the near
I hope
future.
so.
But I guess reading Dante was good for me as like a ex-fundamentalist Christian to read, like, a pre-Renaissance or early Renaissance mind, this brilliant mind. And Dante's take, as I understand it, was really interesting to me because it has to do with love love enhanced or thwarted and so on, rather than an angry adolescent God who will kill you forever for, breaking the rules.
Well, Dante was getting a certain degree of revenge on the Florentine bankers also by putting them in compromising situations in hell.
And they didn't kill him somehow, because I think he made something useful for people to use, actually.
So does Dal Tokyo disappear in these, or does it become hell and then purgatory?
It's recast. In Mount Purgatory in my comics, it's a institution of higher learning. It's Jimbo's trying to get a degree in English history, in English literature, but it's conducted in this robotic mall. And so he has to scale this mountain, and the mountain's a test in that for every place station on the mountain he reaches, he has to quote something that suggests he knows that literary moment and allude to some other piece of literature that echoes that moment. So it's really a reading list more than anything, because I started reading. I'm badly educated, not that the teachers didn't try, but I was not a good student. And so at the point when I was doing those Jimbo adaptations of Dante, I was really reading every sort of classical satire I could get my hands on. And kind of recommending them,
So you refer to them throughout the text, and
it's a book that's impossible to read, and it's heavily footnoted, but there's no numbers on the footnotes. So you just figure it out.
But you're diverging from, it's not like you're sticking with Dante's text, you're diverging.
Pretty much. I mean, it doesn't look the same, but all the places that people are and the things they say are alluded to. And when I did Inferno, I was just kind of replacing the characters in Dante's Inferno with my characters that had similar attributes, if I could find them. And then Purgatory was a much more purgatorial process. It became a really very convoluted procedure, because I made the premise, this is going to be really exciting, of my premise, which is probably untrue, is that Boccaccio's Decameron is an encoded version, a reference to Dante's Divine Comedy. And so I looked for similarities, and I did word counts and
between the Decameron and
the Divine Comedy, and looked for images that would allude to the themes, and it was really crazy.
Is it easy to, you have to decode it then sort of as you're reading it, or if you wanted to see that, or do you make it obvious?
It's to be decoded. There's one reviewer, I think his name was Adam White, who did an amazing version of actually getting all of the text.
Is that right?
And working, kind of solving the puzzle, but I never expected anyone to try to do that in a way. I just hoped they would go read satires.
So are you going to do Paradise? Or
maybe.
You've done Purgatorio and Inferno.
I've done Purgatory and Inferno, so yeah, I have to do a lot of research.
Paradise seems like it would be a fun one. I mean,
it's really, Paradises would take the form more of mandalas in a way. It's almost like Buddhist sand paintings or something. There's all these concentric circles that on Dante's trip from earthly paradise to the, proximity to God.
Yeah. They could be having barbecues and rock concerts and,
Yeah. And but I don't know. There'd be many ways to treat it, but I'd have to study it. I've applied for a grant to study for it, so if I got the grant, I'll have a year's study.
That's good.
So we'll see.
So have you done any other like classic literature?
If I have, I've forgotten.
Okay.
Usually I'm just making things up.
You remember the the classic comics.
Classics Illustrated.
Yeah, I can remember those from childhood where they did, or like Moby Dick or something in comic book form and stuff.
Right. Moby Dick in 32 pages.
Were you thinking of that at all, or did you read those when you were a kid?
I liked them. I was aware of them. I mean, I wouldn't like them. I liked some of them. Some of them were more readable than others.
I wonder, was there ever a Dante's Inferno, I wonder, as like classic?
I imagine there was. I would be surprised if there weren't. I don't remember it offhand. I was very struck by what's the one? H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, that had a great cover, and it was really kind of close to the story.
As a classic comic, you mean?
Yeah. But,
so was Pee Wee Herman a fan of Jimbo's, or how did that happen?
I guess so. I think that at the point when I was contacted by Pee Wee and his people, I was visible in LA because I'd done Frank Zappa covers, I'd done a lot of posters and things for punk bands.
You did the Screamers?
I did the Screamers logo and various punk. I was visible at that moment somehow, and so I was approached to do a poster for his stage show, and I didn't really know about him, so I went to see his show, and I saw that a lot of the things he was working on were similar to things that I was working on in Dallas before I left with some friends. We had a performance art group. That's what you call it, right? Performance art band or whatever. And we did puppets and comedy and things in galleries and museums in Dallas, and it was similar to Pee Wee.
And Pee Wee was doing a stage show like that? Or?
He was doing an infantile, a throwback to 50s television kid shows.
But not for kids. It was for more like an ironic thing for adults or something. Or
That's right. It was aimed at an adult audience. So there wasn't particularly. It was more nostalgic than really risque or anything. But it was aimed at adults.
And he had some of the characters that ended up on his TV show too, or were there on his stage show?
It's true. There was
Phil Hartman and those guys, or
Phil Hartman didn't end up on the TV show. He ended up going to Saturday Night Live. And but other people were. Miss Yvonne was on the stage show, and it was a whole new thing. But there were a lot of the characters carried through. Yeah. There was the movie
Cowboy
Curtis.
Cowboy Curtis, right?
Which was
Fishman.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence Fishburne, right?
Yeah, giant actor. And so anyway, that was a kind of an organic thing that grew out of the stage show. And but we did write a movie script first for a movie that didn't get made. Paul and I wrote a movie, the first Pee Wee's Big Adventure, for Paramount. We had a development deal.
Oh, yeah?
And then they rejected it, and so he and Phil Hartman wrote the first Pee Wee movie that was made. And then after
that was after the TV show, wasn't it?
That was before the TV show.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay.
And so the second movie was a circus movie, and that was made at the same time as the TV show, or when we were on break or whatever. It was an intense showbiz experience.
What was your role on the TV show?
I was the head designer. The show in the first year was done in New York at a company called Broadcast Arts, and they're a very amazing company that did every kind of animation, and they had their whole staff. And but then I came in as head designer, and I have two friends that worked with me on the show as co-designers, Wayne White and Rick Heitzman. Rick I'd gone to college with, and he was in the performance art group with me, and Jay Cotton, who was in the same performance art group, ended up writing the music for Pee Wee initially.
And they were, and you were like a design team, or are there specific things that you can point to in the show that you were more responsible for, or less, or so?
A lot of the things you see on the show were designed by other people. I designed a lot of things. What I actually did was orchestrate things a lot. And as head designer, if you're a head designer, you get to sit in more meetings. You know, so a lot of it was like reading scripts, finding out what there is to design, and then designing multiple versions of them. And then it was Paul's show, so he was involved in choosing what the final elements looked like.
Yeah, because everything had to be, there were all those characters like the chair and the floor and the globe and Randy. I mean, I always thought Randy seemed like Jimbo to me. Am I wrong, or is that?
He looked a little like Jimbo to me, but he was designed by Wayne White.
Was he?
Wayne designed all the puppets on the show, and he was a puppeteer. He had worked with Red Grooms before he worked on the Pee Wee show.
Yeah, it does have a Red Grooms feeling to it.
And he said it was a neighbor kid that he knew.
Randy?
Yeah, that's what he said.
The bad kid, the bad little kid.
But it was fine with me. I didn't really want Jimbo on the show, It was like, let it be the Pee Wee show.
No, I mean, not by name.
But it looks like him a bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Pug nose.
Yeah, the kind of freckled face.
But Randy's evil.
Yeah, he is very evil.
Jimbo's nice.
Jimbo's just confused a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. Boring, even.
But so they would write all these scripts like around all these because all the characters had to be established, and then they'd write these scripts revolving around the characters, right? Yeah.
Right. We would, before the season started and continuing, the scripts were being written, and so one of my jobs was to read these scripts and notate anything visual Oh, there's a talking window. There's a cow that comes to the talking window.
Right, the talking
There's a
window.
kitchen. You know, where are these things in relation to each other? And that's a lot of what I did. In the second season, we went to LA, and the set got very big and different.
Where were you? Where did it begin?
It began in New York. We did it on Broadway at above Houston.
Is that right?
Found a sweatshop and threw all those sewing machines out and built this set there. It was tiny and intense, and it wasn't a set. So there had to be an air conditioning truck on the street with a big tube that ran up into the building so everyone didn't die in there.
Oh, I always assumed it was always in California, I guess.
After the first year, it was, and for various companies.
And then how many years did it go?
I don't know.
There were...
It was intense. It was just going to burn me out. Because I was also working on all the toy design and product design at the same time. So I would work for 2 months on the TV show, and then I would go work on products.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing kind of fell apart after a while.
You did some of that packaging of the toys and so forth.
Yeah, with 50 companies. It was intense.
Yeah, the marketing, yeah. The merchandising.
Merch.
And
it was fun. We made an incredible show, I think, for kids. I think kids loved it.
Yeah,
but I got burned out. I just got, you can't really talk after doing something
really,
like
it was
that.
like a 24 hours you were on.
It's like being a John Waters movie a little bit, like Designer Frenzy or something, you know.
Yeah.
People like run at you and show you swatches of cloth.
Right.
Like, what should cherry be? You know, this or this or this or this or this or this. Now, you know.
And then after that, you came to New York, or that you moved to New York in the 80s.
I came to New York right before the PB show happened. And so in 85 I came, and the PB show, I guess, started in 86 or something like that. And so I was already
before
here.
it started airing?
Right.
And then,
but the first show in LA, it was an outgrowth of the stage show. So that was out of the Groundling Theater. That became an HBO show. But the CBS television show was a couple of years later.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. And then, but you know, you normally want to just be in your studio painting, right? I mean, that's Pee-wee's an intense thing, but you know, if you had your choice, you'd probably just want to sit and be in your studio painting. Right?
No, it's true, and that's mostly what I do. But I have to make money, and so I worked as a commercial artist, like. However, you know, whatever the jobs were, you know, I did all kinds of things as a commercial artist. But in a way, it's easier to get famous as a cartoonist, and it's easier to get famous as a commercial artist than get known as a painter, because as a painter, you put your work in a gallery, and 200 people come through in a month and have a look at it. And if you do illustrations for Rolling Stone or Time magazine, then a million people see them.
Well, thanks, Gary. That concludes our program. Please join us again for our next episode of Constructing Knowledge.